Many people who need glasses have relatively mild prescriptions. If they were born 150 years ago, they would have managed just fine because their minor deficiency in vision would not have affected their life in any meaningful way. In this day and age, society is built around a presumption of literacy, which includes being able to read signs, which means accurate distance vision that people would not have needed in the past, as well as reading large amounts of small print, which would not have been expected from the majority 150 years ago. Also, do not underestimate the impact of cars driving. It is much more important to be able to accurately identify objects at a distance when you are approaching them at 50 plus mph and require much more stopping distance than a horse and cart. It turns out that childhood exposure to sunshine is critical for the development of our vision. Kids need to be outside to prevent myopia. The artificial light we currently use just doesn't cut it. Too dim and not enough of the right frequencies of light. Nearsightedness is a modern problem caused by spending years reading fine print in school, sitting close to a screen, etc. Way back when, I'm sure plenty of people would have needed glasses but still managed without them. Probably led to a lot of urban myths and superstitions because nobody really knew they had that bad eyesight. For nearsightedness, there's evidence that the eye stops growing longer based on high-intensity light exposure. People who were outside more and reliant on sunlight would have had that constant exposure, and the eye would stop growing at an earlier stage. With people inside using lower intensity and limited spectrum lighting, that growth stops later in life, resulting in a retina that's slightly too far from the lens for the lens to just correct itself. Farsightedness isn't that common developmentally outside of more serious underlying causes. And with age you get there because the lens becomes harder with age and is less able to correct for up-close images. I feel like glasses are a necessity mainly for transportation and operating large machinery. If those didn't exist, then no glasses needed. A few hundred years ago only like 5% people could read. There wasn't much need to able to see with crystal clear finer details. The main reason to need such clarity in sight is to be able to read. Most people were content to see everything blurry their entire life. Life moved a lot slower, and not so long ago, most people didn't read. There weren't televisions or screens. And traffic moved at a pedestrian's speed. If you couldn't see well at a distance, you were probably just considered a bad hunter and you subsisted some other way. I actually believe people in the past had better eyesight as well as better hearing, as they had to hunt to survive. Something I've heard said that contributes a lot to this is that people are spending a lot more time indoors and looking at things that are close to them, namely phones and computer monitors, and maybe to some extent TVs. Although people generally don't have as close of a viewing distance to TVs as computer monitors and phones. A fake sunlight is good for your eyes, and being deprived of it, or at least UV, can make your eyes weak and underdeveloped for the looking at things close up all the time. If you spend a lot of time outside, the distance that you look at things is going to be more varied, and you'll be looking at far away things a lot more. If you're always looking at things that are close, then your eyes adjust to that being the normal viewing distance, and that's where nearsightedness rates rising in past decades comes from. If nobody has done so yet, someone should do some comparative studies of populations of people that exist now that spend most of their time outside in the sun and aren't looking at phones and computers all the time. Rather than just compare people in the West now to people in the West in the past, if there is a big difference in eyesight, you'd be able to determine it there more reliably, I think. However, there are other complicating factors like nutritional needs not being as well fulfilled in underdeveloped parts of the world that might affect eye health and development, so it's not a perfect comparison. Consumption of hormone disruptors like lead and microplastics, for example, could also affect health. in ways we don't yet understand, and one of those may be eyesight. We have very resilient brains and can automatically adjust to an incredible amount of difficulty. Really well, that allows us to get by. Other senses and abilities even compensate without us consciously noticing. It's a sure bet that a large number of people who think they see and hear well do not. Likely conditions that aren't new and have just gotten progressively worse. Up until old age, of course, when all the various disintegrating parts have mostly deteriorated to a point where the system simply just collapses. The switch to universal schooling meant that kids were spending large parts of the daytime under roofs and artificial light. The recent change to helicopter parenting and kids addicted to screens mean that they are spending even less time outside. In my youth, we put blame on reading too many books. But it turns out that the problem was too much time inside reading. 2 reasons. 1 is that we do a lot things that require seeing well. If not for those things, most of us could get by without glasses. The second is that because some people have genetically bad eyesight, thousands of years ago, they would have died before having kids. Now we take care of those people and they live to procreate and so have kids with bad eyesight. And it gets perpetuated. Teeth is another thing that is an evolutionary fix for the same reasons. We take care of people with genetically bad teeth. We spend a lot of time in modern life reading things. Signs, menus, TV screens. Most people had no need for this 150 years ago. Cars didn't exist, so few if any road signs. If you were nearsighted and read a book, you'd just hold it further away. There was also a lot more illiteracy, so for those people it didn't matter. A lot of people were probably also just labeled as dumb if they couldn't learn how to read due to their vision. But in the pre-industrialized world, you really didn't need as much visual acuity. People who were accountants and bankers and things like that frequently wore glasses, which have been around for centuries. The bifocal glasses were invented over 200 years ago. Where would we be if Columbus and Magellan wore glasses? I am not an optometrist and I cannot speak to all forms of visual deficiencies. But I have a suspicion that the reason some people need glasses nowadays has to do with inflammation caused by the modern diet and exposure to chemicals in the food that weren't around in the past. I have a subscription for corrective lenses. I use my glasses to see long distances and I wear contacts sometimes as well. I had quite an eye-opening experience when I executed an extensive fast a few years back. I went 14 days without any food or calorie intake. Only water. Aside from all the other amazing benefits of giving your digestive system a well-deserved break and forcing your body to burn through whatever fat reserves you may have, I noticed that my vision became perfect while I was not eating anything. Everything was sharp and vibrant, at all distances. It was amazing, and the effect lasted for quite some time after I began eating again. My vision has since gone back to the same level of blurriness that it was before the fast. Myopia was less of a problem for our ancestors because they spent their entire lives outside under the sun. I would like to conduct a fast again sometime to see if I can reproduce the same effects. But I have not yet worked up the courage to give it a go again, as it was quite a challenge. There weren't really a lot of things to read more than a couple hundred years ago. Most people were illiterate. If you had great vision, maybe you were a hunter. If you had shit vision, maybe you were a hole digger. Everyone died by 40. It wasn't like you need to read road signs at 80 miles per hour. Without my glasses, I could get by if I didn't read or drive. My dog had cataracts. The vet said, well, it is not like he has to read the paper. If I was illiterate, couldn't read like most people even a couple hundred years ago, there's less need for vision. If I didn't drive a car and instead trusted a horse to see the path, then I wouldn't need to see as well. If nothing's coming at me at more than a walking pace, I don't need to discern a lot of detail. Things like shovels, hoes and plows are pretty big and don't need a lot of accuracy. I might be a poor hunter, but I am anyway with corrected eyesight. Most people don't need cheaters until they are about 50, which is about as long as someone was expected to live in the 1400s. There's a lot less need to see things really clearly. If you can't read, there's nothing to read. And you aren't operating vehicles at high speeds. Also though, yeah, technology has changed what we look at and how far we look at it from. If you're old enough, you remember being told by your parents to watch the TV from further away, because it was recognized that watching it from too close would skew your vision eventually. I'm 47 and I basically all of a sudden needed glasses. It's hard to focus on things and I can't read small print. It will in all likelihood happen to most people in their 40s. https://www.canr.msu.edu/news/the_benefit_for_our_eyesight. It took until I was in a big lecture room when I finally realized I needed glasses. Until then everything seemed fine. I could clearly see everything I needed to. Wasn't until my habit of always sitting in the back of the class finally revealed the truth. Other students could make out what was written on the board and I couldn't. I was 20 when I got glasses. It's not obvious if you just don't know. Anecdotally, when I started playing video games consistently as a kid around grade 4 or 5, my vision slowly started to decline, starting at a point where I hardly knew I needed them in the back of the class to read the board. By the time I graduated, I could hardly read 2 inches in front of my face without glasses. Even now, although I don't do it casually, I can still drive and see well enough to know I'm in my lane and if there's any cars around me. What I cannot do is make out any signs unless I'm right up on them. I don't think this would hinder me too much from working a farm, working with money, clerk or whatever, or even as a scholar. If it did hinder me, it certainly wouldn't take my ability away. With the dramatic revolutions in technology and the way average people live in the last 100 years, our senses and bodies are still catching up. Up until the modern era, people were usually outside way more on average, and this means viewing more objects at a distance. Eyes are far from the only thing affected. More people used to have straight teeth and generally less dental problems. Humans for millennia chewed harder food because the preservation methods used at the time made the food harder. Now, much of the food we eat as children is soft and easy to chew, and the theory is this causes teeth to grow abnormally. Many people need glasses to read and view screens but can get by fine doing other things except for getting the odd headache. These needs are a fairly new phenomenon. I have degenerative conditions, though glasses technically don't help. I wear scleral lenses, which almost completely mitigate the issue. Until my mid-20s I had great vision. I successfully ignored the problem until my early 40s when I realized I couldn't see faces if there was more light behind them than in front. Humans are unable to live alone in the wild for prolonged periods of time. A hunter-gatherer tribe can do fine if half of its members have poor vision for objects at a long distance as long as the other half have quite good eyesight. I can still read if I just use my right eye, but it's a tedious process. Without corrective lenses, I have no idea what sort of work I could do, especially in a pre-industrial society. Best case would be finding a sponsor to do weird, wobbly art of some kind. Or maybe as a teacher for the kids of people rich enough to give me a place to live. But the acquisition of new knowledge would have been a problem for me after age 40. I had a rough time at work because of this. Major reading issues. Until I found a doctor who knew how to treat it. So, I'd probably just be someone's blind relative that kids had to be quiet around. How did we manage for millennia without them? Quote, we didn't. Well, I have glasses, and sometimes forget them. Why? Pretty simple. If I don't need to recognize faces or characters, i.e., I don't need details, I'm just not bothered. Back in the day, like in 1400 after JC, people didn't know how to write nor read except a very few. Therefore, the world looked normal to them. Plus, they didn't have anything to compare, experience perfect vision. So, now, you're constantly reading, writing, recognize your colleagues, whatever. That requires accuracy. And that's when your problem becomes apparent. Cold sweat smile. I have the best vision in my family. 20/30ths. I always tell them, if we had lived 200 years prior, you all would be breaking stones for a living and I'd be the sole breadwinner for the family. Lol. There is also a mechanistical explanation that late 20th century, early 21st century society puts kids indoor for too long and that not having indirect sunlight into the eyes make the orbit not stop growing, so that myopia is much more common than in the past decades. It's my uneducated opinion that this is true. Similar to how crooked teeth are a relatively new thing. This is why we used to have so many Bigfoot and Loch Ness monster sightings. Corrective lenses have really cut down on those sightings. How did I survive to the age of 5 not being able to see the biggie? The world may never know. Survival of the fittest. Those with really bad eyes likely died more often, leaving people with good eyes. Nowadays you can be blind and live just fine. Relatively. As you age, your eyes sag just like the rest of you. Most people's eyes change shape due to this, usually getting longer. Your eyes take light in the front, focus it with your lens, and process it in the back. So the length between these spots is important. If the length is too long, you will be nearsighted. If the length is too short, you will be farsighted. People had bad sight before, but there was not sufficient technology to manufacture lenses. In previous centuries, exact sight was also not very necessary for daily life as printed text was uncommon except for official documents. Most people were illiterate and/or had oral traditions. If they needed to improve their sight temporarily, they could use magnifying glasses, monocles, or small binoculars. Many people who wear glasses have weak prescriptions. They could make do without them today if they really had to. They just make their life better. Also, you have to remember that widespread literacy is a very new thing. Most people in most places couldn't read a millennium ago. So your daily life didn't depend on you being about to read signs and shit from afar or reading books up close. I see 2 reasons for this happening. 1. Change in lifestyle. A lot of people don't go out enough to places where the eyes need to adjust focus length of the eyes for far objects. The ciliary eye muscle weaken from little to no use. This leads to loss of strength. Limit if the range of movement for the muscle and lens. Personally, I believe the eye's muscles will keep losing their strength every time we make adjustment. I am saying this based on observations where people's correction lens power kept increasing when they used spectacles during indoor use. Also, the instances of myopia is much more prevalent today because of how often kids are looking at things close up to their face while their eyes are developing. I know your immediate thought it's phone screens and iPad kids, but actually a lot of it started when literacy became the norm and kids started being able to read sooner and sooner. Not just kids but all humans being able to read and focus on that instead of using their eyes to look at great distances to hunt or look for enemies. 2. Increase in detection. It is easy to check for vision issues and get corrections done. Earlier it was somewhat unknown, inaccessible, unaffordable. I believe we should go out more often. Allow the eye muscles to get activated for full range. Hope it helps. Feel free to ask questions or connect. Thanks. Abu K. A lot of people just lived with bad vision. It was a condition. But also, There's theory that not seeing things from afar at early age makes people myopic. Living in urban settings forces us to only see things near you because of buildings and confined spaces. If you're illiterate anyways, you don't need to see well enough to be able to make out small or distant text. If you're not driving a car 20 times faster than man can walk, you don't need to be able to see as well as far into the distance. We don't have all the answers, but our current understanding on why so many people are getting myopia is the lack of sunlight exposure during childhood. Sunlight regulates the growth of the eyeball, and lack of sunlight causes elongation of the eyeball. Elongated eyeball equals nearsighted. Lots of scientific papers on this. There are some jobs that require good vision, but there used to be enough jobs where making out a blurry blob is good enough that glasses weren't as critical. Nowadays, there are few jobs where reading wouldn't be required at least occasionally. People just went through life with blurry vision. It's not like everybody was 20/20 until 1870. I've heard that focusing one's gaze to further distances regularly, the horizon or expanses like the next hill or tree line, as opposed to living in suburban areas and focusing on more immediate surroundings like buildings and traffic, plays some part. Obviously, reading a lot creates a need for glasses, suggesting city folks wear glasses more than country. I wonder. The printing press wasn't created until the 1400s. At the start of the 20th century, 80% of people couldn't read or write. There was no need to wear glasses. More people need glasses today because we have eliminated many causes of death related to not seeing well, which in turn means people with bad eyesight pass on their bad eyesight genetics to their kids more often. Additionally, our current society has a lot of bad habits that contribute to bad eyesight, like looking at screens. Native here, traditionally, if a child had some hindrance to their ability to thrive, they were arranged in marriage as a package deal with an able-bodied sibling who might otherwise have a dowry that would be unobtainable alone. If they required more in-depth care, the family would keep them and they'd figure out a task requiring the other senses to excel at and generate a livable income or trade. My GG grandfather was born sighted but lost his ability to see anything other than shapes by the time his second child was born. His aging father moved back into the home to help with some tasks, but he was otherwise independent. Even trained his horses to memorize a pack train route so he could earn a living hauling freight between his hometown and the city. There is a story where the block to stop his carriage gave way and it went careening down the hill, breaking a piece off the wheel assembly. By the time our family noticed he wasn't on schedule to return home and found him, he had already felt out the problem, fashioned a repair out of a nearby sapling, and had lashed his cart together. The only thing that took him so long was he had to count all his packages to make sure it was all there. Squinting, not being able to see, that's how. I would assume there is some level of natural selection going on ever since eyeglass became commonplace some approximately 300 years ago. If I was born 10,000 years ago, with this vision, I probably wouldn't have survived. Even now, while many need glasses, not everyone can get them due to the cost and access to a professional to test and provide the proper strength. There have been recent advancements made for developing nations, and for some reason being marketed on TV for people as a cheap alternative in the US, where they can be adjusted rather than needing new lenses made, but it's still not ideal. Myopia is a growing epidemic in modern society. Sunlight during childhood and adolescence stops our eyeballs from elongating. We spend too much time inside, not getting enough sunlight into our eyes. This results in overgrowth of the eyeballs, and we end up myopic. I support all of the historical examples. In 2024, I use readers and have asked my eye doctor if I needed a stronger prescription. She said that people Like me, who have had 20/20 vision for so long. Humble brag, s. Any deviation in sight feels like a big deal when it is not. So, I felt that was interesting. You think just because you have trouble seeing far away you will have trouble procreating? That logic is obviously flawed. I figure back in the day in nomadic tribes they just got left in the woods for dead unless they were the best storyteller, drummer, or basket weaver. I would be dead. I've worn glasses for as long as I can remember. I didn't think my vision was that bad without them. My job used to let us wear normal glasses. Then they had to be safety glasses. So I had just safety glasses without a prescription while I waited for my prescription ones. Our ancestors very rarely got back pain because they didn't sit for 10+ hours a day. I was not prepared for how bad my vision was without glasses. I wasn't prepared for how blurry everything was. Gen X here. I really enjoyed having better than 20/20 vision day or night until my early 20s when I began working with digital displays. College and subsequently, every eye exam was officially 20/15 or better. Thought I might become a pilot for a time. My children, 2 out of 3, played a lot of video games. I didn't grow up with that luxury. Those 2 began wearing glasses before HS. Emo. It's worth it to protect your vision with I. Better quality displays. E. Protection from blue light for comfort at most any computer display. And E. Unrelated, but I would seriously tell myself to skip the tans and use sunscreen to protect my skin. Better daily and weekly. There are better quality sunscreens that will not irritate your eyes or skin than most OTC brand stuff. Get it. Use it. Our vision and skin health are mostly a one-time deal. Protect and preserve yours better than I did. Because most of the time, need glasses is relative. Seeing leaves in HD isn't necessary for living life. Most people could get around just fine without them. Most people want glasses because it lets them drive vehicles. Now that can become a need if you're working in the US where commuting is a thing. But point is that the need is very recent. Far-sighted sees well far away, and near-sighted sees well up close. The eye is either too long, far-sighted, or too short, near-sighted, from front to back. As a result, the light doesn't hit the macula. The lenses bend the light to bring it into focus on the macula. You don't need a very good eyesight to survive in an agricultural society. Yes, it's good to have good eyesight when sewing. And it's one of the most common complaints we have of bad eyesight from pre-industrial times. But in general, only the worst level of vision impairment will cause difficulties when working the land or hunting. Our ancestors had healthier teeth without brushing because their food was fibrous and required 10x more chewing. Age-related reading correction. Until somewhere around 40 the muscles our eye can change the shape of the crystalline lens in our eye so we can go from distance 20 feet and beyond to near 13 inches minus 16 and everything in between. Around 40 the lens becomes too rigid to change shape, resulting in the need for reading correction. Our ancestors didn't need glasses when they lived outside and didn't stare at books, screens for hours straight. Reading glasses were invented in 1286 in Italy. Besides all the answers about what causes more nearsightedness, there's also no more evolutionary selection against it. Assume it was very genetic. The ancient people which needed glasses just died much sooner because of all kinds of dangers. And then have fewer nearsighted children. Today, a kid with glasses has the same survival chances as one without. At least in a developed country. Most people with glasses can see well enough without them to survive in a group of people in nature. You don't need perfect 20/20 vision to find berries. And as long as you can contribute to the tribe, people will help you out. Those with particularly bad eyes were probably eliminated, although there is evidence that tribes frequently cared for those that could not care for themselves. Also, you really only need to get to reproductive age for a trait to be carried forward. And most people still have relatively good eyes by age 20. Scientists found out that people who get little to no natural light are way more likely to develop myopia. They were able to prove it by raising chickens with special goggles that filter out UVB rays. I forgot which one. And the chickens' eyeballs elongated, giving them trouble seeing. The highest rate of short-sightedness is reported in the highest developed nations, as people tend to have office jobs. Lots of people in the past just didn't see very well. Turns out, you don't need to see super sharply to survive. Especially since humans generally lived in large family groups, small interrelated communities, and helped each other out. People did the tasks they were best suited for. So how well they could see would play into what kind of tasks they would do. If it had been 500 years ago, I wouldn't have needed glasses. But I've become increasingly unable to read fine print or quickly read cluttered signs, etc. That's a handicap today. But I'd manage just fine without my glasses if I had to navigate a forest, forage, harvest a field, etc. This is one of these questions like, what did people do to cure cancer before modern medicine? They just didn't. We are primates. We evolved to pick colored fruits out of trees and tubers out of the ground. We need close-up vision, hence people are nearsighted. We also typically didn't breed into our old age. Reading glasses become required around age 40. And therefore the need for reading glasses is not influenced by evolution. Evolution rewards traits that lead to increased breeding. Anything that happens after breeding age is largely irrelevant to evolution. We are actively testing people for their vision. It's relatively inexpensive and affordable for the masses. Historically, there was either no test or nothing to be done. Our corrective lenses were expensive and extremely hard to acquire. You had to be very wealthy to even have the option of correction to consider. If it's not even an option to consider, you just deal with it and probably don't even really think about it much. Your eyesight was what it was. Actually, we are spending way too much of our formative years indoors, and ophthalmologists are finding some sunshine is good for eyesight. https www.ao.org/i-health/news/prevent-childhood-myopia-sunshine-outdoors. I have pretty severe myopia and my eyes are odd shapes. To the point without my glasses I can barely see far in front of me. Cannot judge distance and am generally useless. However, as most people with short-sightedness will tell you, if it's right up close to us, we are just fine. I would have been absolutely a danger in any outdoor or physical job. But reading, writing or sewing, anything done up close, my vision is practically perfect. Glasses, like any of the tools we have created to help disabilities, have just opened up more life doors for everyone. Before that, we just had fewer options. We didn't need to see as accurately before the Industrial Revolution. There's a fair amount of evidence that bright light during infancy and childhood reduces the possibility of myopia, nearsightedness. So the fact we have gone from living outdoors on the plains of Africa to living mostly indoors may have some effect, but it's still not clear how large of an effect this actually is. When do most people put glasses on? When they're reading, when they're in low light, and when they're driving. These were activities that don't typically come up for a feudal serf or a hunter-gatherer. I suspect my nearsightedness might have allowed me to make some superior arrowheads. I would not have been able to shoot them into anything but the people who could might have found that my skill justified feeding me. It's reading and it's living indoors. Being inside and reading cause nearsightedness. This is why glasses are basically universal in East Asia. I am very nearsighted. I grew up learning how to identify people by body shape and how they moved. There have also been studies showing nearsighted people see movement better. I wear glasses constantly, but I can and do go without them when I have a headache or just want to lay in bed. So many people in this thread are assuming rates of poor vision are the same now as they were in the past. Our modern indoor lifestyles have greatly increased the rate of short-sightedness. I've heard that less exposure to sunlight is a risk factor. Myopia was a bigger problem for the people that had it, but far fewer people had it. Last I knew, myopia in the population increased the more writing and reading on paper became widespread. Don't know what is the current consensus. Reminds me of the comedic timing in movies, cartoons when the grandparents try to do something nice and it's off by a little bit, so it's practically useless or looks very bad. But they cherish the effort they made, probably from muscular dystrophy or sight problems, etc. When you can't see and you don't see the problem with that. When I got my glasses for the first time, I was 17. Everything looked like it had been polished. Things looked so clear and shiny. Also, I had a little trouble walking downstairs with my glasses on for a few days. It's pretty clearly just the amount of close-up text and monitors, phones we use, right? I don't see the mystery. https://www.nature.com/articles/d41586-024-01518-2. Nearsightedness is classified as an epidemic. Within recent history of mandatory vision tests of similar quality, the rates in this decade compared to the rates in the 80s and even 90s show a sharp increase in the number of children needing glasses. So much so that some countries approve drug treatments that other countries aren't yet sure help prevent the worsening of myopia. Some change education curriculums to increase outdoor time in daylight. Some make national laws that online games and services can't have logged in minors after some time in the evening. But no one is sure as yet why. But they also know that myopia isn't just bad vision that's mildly costly to correct. It can cause increased rates of damages vision later in life. Which is why the countries taking it seriously and scattershot trying things are with nationalized healthcare. This is not true. We managed without them in the past. Unclear if you were thinking 1880s, 1780s, 1680s or 280s. Because fewer people had bad vision even in 1980s. It's probably TVs, phones and tablets too. If not due to the time spent focused with light shining into the eyes, then due to not working well outside and keeping kids playing indoors instead of outdoors. Same can be said of increased homework hours. I think it's Norway or Sweden that showed increased myopia despite decreasing the amount of time spent on homework before age 12. But then maybe phones counteracted it with more indoor time. I was just thinking about my vision the other day. I would have probably died in a time where glasses weren't available. My prescription is -6.00 in one eye and -6.50 in the other. I can't see the ground without my contacts. I can't see the dashboard in my car. Without contacts I can't see anything more than like 6 inches from my face. Written language is a relatively recent invention if you look at all of human history, and for most of it, reading and writing was reserved for a tiny percent of the population. Having near-perfect vision wasn't necessary for most people. There was a poster at the eye doctor's office. Kids need to be outside, using their distance vision, for at least a couple hours every day until age 12 to reduce the risk of developing nearsightedness. With kids not playing outside as much or ever after school plus tablets, screens, computer use plus very short school recesses, the increase in glasses wearers is inevitable. With all this research on indoor environments being bad for kids' eyesight, what can we do to get schools to have kids outside more? There is strong evidence that nearsightedness is increasing globally, and that this is primarily due to lack of bright, outdoor light exposure in youth. https://www.nature.com/articles/d41586-024-01518-2. I've got pretty extreme nearsightedness, and while my life would be miserable without glasses, I could do basic farm work kind of okay, and for 90% of humanity that's all that was needed. For example, 41.6% of Americans were nearsighted in 2004. 25% of Americans were nearsighted in 1971. That's a 66% increase in approximately 30 years. I only wear my glasses when driving. I can go about my job and hobbies fine without. Back in the day, I wouldn't have made a very good archer, but probably could have done a lot of other things. Myopia wasn't always this common. https://www.nature.com/articles/519276a https www.nature.com/articles/519276a. Looking at close-up things and time spent indoors is a huge risk factor. https onlinelibrary.wiley.com/doi/full/10.1111/aus.13403. Sunlight. Your eyes need sunlight to inhibit growth. When sunlight reaches your eyes, dopaminergic amacrine cells release dopamine, which inhibits the axial growth that is the cause of myopia. We see that during COVID. We had an increase of myopia cases. Now, this doesn't mean sunlight is always good for you. During the hottest parts of the day, you should be indoors. There's a biological reason why siestas were practiced. In simple terms, lack of sunlight lets your eyes become a sort of oval shape, which doesn't allow for clear vision. We managed, but poor vision played a part in mythology. For example, sailors mistook manatees for mermaids. I believe this is the case for many cryptids as well. Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. As a nearsighted person, I imagine that my condition was far riskier for humans and ancestors pre-civilization. Once you get to the point of civilization, you can probably find roles where nearsightedness matters less because of stable location. You only need to reproduce and live long enough to make sure your offspring will stay alive to pass on your genes. This may actually be a result of not spending enough time outdoors in direct sunlight, exposing the eyes to strong, deep red light for a few minutes a day reduces the rate children develop nearsightedness. Our ancestors from the 1800s and prior had, on average, much better vision than we do today. As we grow our eyes, they expand. Growth in the front to back axis responds to instruction from the retina. Ultraviolet light on the retina causes a hormone to be released that inhibits that growth. Being outside all day produces enough of this hormone that by the time a child reaches adulthood, they should have spherical eyes and 20/20 vision. However, kids these days spend 6 hours a day in a classroom, and even more inside on a screen, going all the way back to the Industrial Revolution that put kids in workhouses. Being indoors reduces their UV exposure, therefore reducing production of the growth inhibitor hormone, resulting in eyes that grow too long and egg-shaped, resulting in short-sightedness. At the higher prescriptions, over -5, this also greatly increases the risk of retinal detachment later in life. Send your kids outside. One thought that has not been expressed is that there is a correlation between time spent indoors and needing glasses. I have 2 nephews who are outdoorsy sort of people, not the sort to ever sit and read a book. They have perfect vision today in their 20s. Other relatives who are more studious, reading books, studying hard, all short-sighted. 150 years ago, many of our ancestors came from places where the life expectancy was around 54. Guys, at the high end, not for nothing, but eyeglasses have been around since about 1300. So 150 years ago, They had access to corrective lenses. In the past, people most of their time outside at all ages with lots of good natural light and looked both close and far away all the time. This helped their eyes develop right as kids, and also helped to keep their eyes from getting bad as quickly as they got older. Back then, most people wouldn't need glasses until they were pretty old. Most of us can see well enough. I have -2 myopia, and while everything is blurry without my glasses, I can easily go about my day without them. I won't bump into walls or anything like that. I even drove without glasses once, accidentally, and didn't even realize it until I got off the car, so that should give you an idea. Others have mentioned that most people don't need major prescriptions. This is true. Scientists are still working out the causes, but there seems to be a positive association between educational attainment and poor vision. One other theory I see mentioned is reduced exposure to natural sunlight in childhood. Children who spend more time outdoors have a lower chance of becoming nearsighted. But if you really want to drill down into it, what changed? What changed is that we live longer. Basic survival of the fittest. Most people who need glasses do so because of age. In the past, most of us simply died before needing glasses, or died because our body didn't work as efficiently as it once did. Now it should be mentioned that humans are pack animals, so there is a level of survival because our weaknesses can be propped up by the pack, but it's because we died. There were blind people in the past, so were people with short-sightedness and long-sightedness. I guess they just had to live with it. There were also other illnesses which they didn't have a cure for them until recently. Wait till you're over 40. My well-sighted friend. Suddenly, you won't be able to read your phone without holding it at arm's length. The answers about not needing to see as well are valid, but the general answer to what happened to people who needed some modern scientific, medical advance to live is they died. If you couldn't see well enough to escape prey without tripping on something, you got eaten. Lol, we didn't. That's why we have so many religious phenomena, ghosts, and supernatural beings. Meanwhile, it was their friend waving in the distance, and they thought it was a Mothman. To my knowledge, our increasingly indoor and overnight way of living has increased the risk of nearsightedness. And we're not exactly sure what aspect causes our eyes to develop it. But there is a really heavy correlation, bordering on causation. I often think about a tweet I saw that was like, "It's wild people just be out here seeing for free." Because damn, between contacts and glasses, having bad eyes adds up.